Hey, this is Khan, you're watching Ninja Pulls. Welcome to this summary of Update 45, Fallen Banners, the last update before ESO moves to a seasonal content model. Lots more to come on that transition and what it means for us, the players, but first, Update 45 arrives on March 10th for PC and March 25th for console, bringing 2 new dungeons, 6 new dungeon sets and 2 monster sets, 3 new rewards for the worthy sets, some very light combat changes, Reaper Strikes, a new world event, a visual refresh of the starter zones, improvements to green champion points, an update to the world map, the conversion of disguises to collectibles, mount speed changes, some completely new dialogue options, and a new prologue quest. It's a beefier update than most of us expected, so let's get into it, starting with the dungeons. No spoilers, but these are more tied to the core story of The Elder Scrolls Online, specifically the events of the Three Banners War and its wider impact on the world. Exiled Redoubt is an underground fortress built by an exiled imperial noble family who seek to end the war by destroying all alliances and killing everyone. So we infiltrate their refuge to stop them. Exiled Redoubt looks like a familiar imperial fortress setting and has the usual 3 bosses, each with its own hard mode, and presumably the usual 3 secrets along the way. Lepsiclusa is an island sanctuary where the Moth Priests guard one of the Elder Scrolls. It's been attacked by an army of deserters from the war, led by former battlefield Emperor Orpheon the Tactician. They plan to use the scroll as a destructive weapon, and again, we have to stop them. Lepsiclusa uses the Hughes Bane architecture and playset, which obviously isn't new, but which we haven't really seen much since 2016. It's also more of an old school dungeon with 3 main bosses and 3 mini-bosses in the style of Imperial City Prison or Bloodroot Forge, so probably more story dense. No secrets this time, but still the usual 3 hard modes. Let's come back to the sets later and talk first about the new world events, our first taste of the new seasonal content model. In this case, we're talking about themed encounters or threats, which will start appearing around the world with new enemies and rewards, and then be removed from the game once the season is over. These are called Reaper Strikes, and they're all about our old enemy, the Worm Cult. Here's the blurb. Strange new devices known as Soul Reapers have begun to surface across Tamriel, coinciding with the resurgence of the Worm Cult. Engage in these events to rescue their sacrifices and thwart the Worm Cult's growing threat. There'll be a unique achievement furnishing and a new skill style for clearing these, and they can appear anywhere the Dark Fissures currently appear in-game. Those are the small incursions in base game zones that are sort of like mini Dark Anchors, but with just 3 small adds and then 2 elite adds. I'm guessing these Reaper Strikes will be bigger than that, and tougher, I hope. We don't know how long they'll be in the game, but I'm guessing 6 to 9 months or so, because it looks like the upcoming story content this year will also feature the Worm Cult, if the upcoming prologue quest is anything to go by. Prologue quests are freebies that always arrive a few months before a big expansion, such as Necrom or Westweald, giving us a little teaser of what's to come, clarifying some of the backstory, and basically setting the stage for what's coming. Here's the description. Join forces with Prince Azar of Sentinel to confront the ominous resurgence of the Worm Cult, whose shadowy attacks using devices known as Soul Reapers now threaten the Fighters and Mages guilds. Gather old allies and delve into the darkness to uncover the horrifying truth behind their return. There's also a new pet, the Mind-Shriven Mudcrab, for completing this quest. Now, I'm going to make a totally separate video about this. Check the right-hand corner to see if it's already up. But for me, these events and the prologue quests are potentially very fucking cool. And if I'm right about this, Zos may have chosen the perfect way to round out the 10th anniversary of ESO with an epic piece of Elder Scrolls history. Watch my next video to find out more. Meanwhile, the combat changes. They seem to be super light this time around. No changes to abilities, except for a handful of fixes, which is great for stability. You won't have to change your setups or learn anything new, but it could also be disappointing if you've been hoping for something specific to get buffed or changed. Here are the main things. Banner Bearer affix effects like Savagery and Prophecy should now work reliably instead of dropping off in content. What seems to have been happening is that when someone left the banner area and lost the buff, it would also remove that buff from the banner player themselves, so that should be fixed. It also looks like the sound effects should be less intrusive from now on. Sorcerer's in-case should now be able to hit larger targets like Olms and Teleria, and the initial impact of the Storm Atronach is now considered pet damage, so it will be buffed correctly by Daedric Prey and any other effects that buff your pets. More on that in a moment. Reliquien got a slight change, not to the 5-piece itself, but to the stat lines. 2 lines of crit chance are changing to weapon and spell damage and offensive penetration, which are slightly weaker in optimized conditions, but the perfected bonus also got changed from max stamina to weapon and spell damage, which evens it out a bit and probably makes it an overall buff for Magicka characters. I assume that's the main reason for this change, since it's such a popular set for single target fights, and ever since hybridization, Magicka characters have used it just as much as stamina characters, and that perfected bonus was effectively doing nothing for them. And yet that line of pen will make it easier to hit the pen cap in content and wear more medium pieces, which is often useful. Azure Blight also got an important fix. Apparently the game was treating the explosions as single target and not AoE damage. Good to know. So in those big Azure Blight fights, don't be surprised if the set suddenly gets a little bump from things like Biting Aura or the multi-target banner. Another big one here is Unleashed Ritualist, the light set from the Cauldron dungeon. I liked the look of this set when it appeared, but the 2 to 4-piece bonuses are meh, and the main effect was single target only. But now they're changing it from all max Magicka to damage, crit chance, and damage. The 16% bonus now buffs the activated Scamp and Twilight abilities as it's supposed to, and that bonus damage now applies to the pets themselves and not just to a marked target. So the pets will deal more damage to everything. Remember that the charged Atro, the Scamp's activated ability, and the Maw of the Infernal's breath attack are all AoE damage, so this could help sorcerers get a bit more cleave in crowded fights. Obviously we'll need to test it, but to give you a rough idea of its potential power, the pets tend to be about 25% of our total damage. 16% of 25% would be a 4% damage increase, so not sure it can go toe-to-toe with the best proc sets, but it's definitely worth a look. Poisonous Serpent, the medium set from Helra Citadel, looks interesting. The 2 max stamina stat lines are being replaced by weapon and spell damage and crit chance, which is awesome, but they're also changing the 5-piece so it deals way less damage but always triggers the poison status effect every 2 seconds, so long as you're light attacking and the enemy has at least 1 poison ability applied to them. They also fixed a bug where heavy attacking would apparently ignore the cooldown on this set, and it's no longer limited by the global cooldown for insta-proc sets. Again, I'd have to test this, but I expect this could get pretty strong in execute on a Dragonknight, for example. Destructive Mage, Way of Fire, Hunt Leader, Soul Cleaver, and Wrathsun also got adjusted. In other news, incoming damage is going to be slightly reduced. Basically, there's a 10% damage reduction that we all get. I think this was added with CP 2.0, partly to make new players less squishy, but now it's being hard-coded to reduce the weight of combat calculations on the server. This means that because of the order in which the game calculates things, the 10% damage reduction will become slightly stronger than before. Some tweaks to stealth. For one thing, a tooltip has been added to your active effects while you're in stealth. Lots of abilities now break stealth when you begin casting them, not when they hit. This includes heavy attacks with Inferno and Frost Staves, by the way. The green champion point tree is getting a very nice upgrade. All these stars, which currently need to be slotted, will now be active all the time. So you just need to put points into them. You no longer need to constantly slot and unslot them to get the benefit. If you've been playing a long time and have a high CP, this is especially nice. We're also getting the first stage in the visual upgrade of the base game zones. Eventually they want to do all of them, but in this update we're getting the starter zones, meaning Betnik, Strozmakai, Bleakrock, Balfoyan and Kanathi's Roost. It is not a complete redesign, they don't seem to have made any new assets for this, but in 10 years Zos have generated a huge amount of assets like terrain, props and clutter, not to mention improvements in lighting and water, all of which have been incorporated into these starter areas. It's not as significant a visual overhaul as perhaps I had hoped, but it kinda depends where you go. Some areas will look much the same, while others will look way better than they did before. As soon as I'm done messing around in the new dungeons on PTS, I'm going to try to do some side-by-side video comparisons to give you a better idea of what's being done here. The fact is, even a minor refresh is very welcome. These areas are starting to look a little bit long in the tooth, and remember, this is eventually coming to all the base game zones. So some of our favourite places like Eldenroot, Mournhold, and Daggerfall will get the same treatment. And I'm hoping the team will maybe spend a little extra time and effort on those important places. That'd be great. Next, the world map, when you're zoomed out like this, is being updated to be less cluttered, so it's not just Way Shrine soup when you look at it. Only your favorited homes will show, not all of them. Dungeons and trials will be hidden by default, but we can toggle all of these things on and off. Quest markers will behave more sensibly as you zoom in and out, plus some more tweaks that make it a little nicer to use and to look at. Apparently there are more map improvements on the way, along with a general overhaul of the UI. Disguises are being converted to collectibles. All that means is that quests where you are given a disguise to use at some point will now grant you a collectible version of that disguise, like a costume I guess, once you complete the quest, so you can use it again whenever you like without it taking up space in your inventory. Whether or not we'll be able to dye these collectibles, we'll have to wait and see. The UESP page says there are 28 disguises in the game, and some are not included in this, at least not yet. The Colopi Essence, for example, which is quite different, and the Shadow Silk Gem, which is more of a polymorph. Base mount speed is being almost tripled, which is great for new players. But before you get excited, the Major Gallop buff is also being halved. So a fully leveled mount with the continuous attack passive unlocked will go exactly the same speed as before. Unless you slot Gifted Rider, which you should be able to now that we have way more flexibility with green CPs. Then you'll get a slight speed boost. We'll take it. They're also adding reminders to get a Mundustone boon for new characters and making it more prominent in the UI. And we're getting a bit more room for role-playing in dialogue options, where some quests will allow us to choose a type of response that fits our character or our attitude towards the NPC. And apparently these will sometimes alter the course of a quest. Now, back to the sets. We don't know the exact numbers on these, so it's impossible to say for sure how good they'll be, but we can get a good sense. From Exiled Redoubt, the light set, Vanderallen's Resonance, is aimed at heavy attack sorcerers, seemingly trying to convince them to play at melee range for twice the proc damage instead of running around at the back of the room like they normally do. Good luck with that. The medium set, Durensi's Bladestorm, creates an AoE dot which then applies a second sticky dot when it ends. Looks niche, but it could be interesting if you need all that penetration. The heavy set, Lucilla's Windshield, is a new source of AoE minor brittle and major protection for the wearer. Both very useful effects, but I'm struggling to think of a situation where this would be the best way to get those things. The monster set, Squall of Retribution, is another fruit machine proc where you get a random defensive effect. It actually looks like it could be pretty strong, provided all of these effects are attractive to you. Maybe PvPers will dig it. From Lepsiclusa, the light set, Fledgling's Nest, is a support set with a mix of sustain and minor courage. Not super exciting. The medium set, Noxious Boulder, sounds fun as hell. Shooting a giant green poison boulder at your target and putting a poison AoE on the ground. It sounds pretty strong, but it does involve heavy attacking, which will restrict its appeal in a lot of situations. The heavy set, Heroic Unity, looks badass, giving an entire dungeon group major heroism, potentially permanently. That's really strong. Drake's Rush, which does the same, has a maximum uptime of 67%. The snag is, you'll need a synergy every 6 seconds, which means at least 4 different synergies in your group for perfect uptime. Also, dungeon tanks are often running Lucent Echoes and Crimson Oath, and dropping either of those sets is going to be tough. Heroic Unity is definitely a cool new option though. The monster set, Orpheon the Tactician, is a tentacle proc, and looks like a cool set for Arcanist roleplayers. Unfortunately, since Arcanists tend to use the Urmage mythic, there's not always room for a monster set, but we'll see how strong it is. Obviously, these are just my initial ideas. Once PTS gets underway, some of these tooltips could change, so keep an open mind and we'll see how these sets turn out once they hit the live server. The same is true for the rewards for the worthy sets. The light set, Arcane's Charity, is a support set which generates ult when you cleanse negative effects. The medium set, Lamp Knight's Art, trades half your tooltip damage for effectively infinite penetration. Now, every point of armor is worth 0.2 mitigation, so you only need to meet a player whose armor stat is 23k higher than your penetration against them for this trade-off to make sense. That doesn't necessarily make it the best set in that situation, because there are many ways to get penetration, but it is something to think about, especially if your build doesn't require light armor for Magicka sustain. The heavy set, Blackfeather Flight, gives you a speed boost whenever you break free. That's it. A little longer than my usual summary, but like I said, there's more here than we expected. Stay tuned for more about the return of the Worm Cult and my speculations about what might be coming in 2025. I'm genuinely excited for this because it's a possibility I was talking about over a year ago, and it's very cool to think that I may have been somewhat in step with what the developers were working on. I'm also doing all 14 DPS class videos, with easy to follow rotations, and updating the Ninja Pulse website as I go. The first one, Magicka Arcanist, is already up, 1 down, 13 to go. There's a load for me to do, so wish me luck, and if you want the Ninja Pulse channel to keep going, there are various ways to support us, and we are super grateful for anything you can offer, even if it's just a like, a share on your Discord, or just a cool comment. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.